Welcome to this session on navigating compliance with EU data transfer requirements. My name is Esther Stringham and I'm a member of the AWS legal team.
And I'm Hans Bos from the AWS Security Assurance team, which works to help our customers run their regulated workloads on AWS.
In this session, we're going to cover an introduction to the data protection terms and also how the data protection requirements or data transfer requirements came to be. And then we're going to look at the data transfer assessments that came out of those data transfer requirements. So let's just look at some key definitions in relation to data transfer. These are personal data, controller, processor, and transfer. With personal data, we mean information that relates to an identified or identifiable natural person. Controller is the entity or the person that determines the purpose, the means, and also the scope of processing of personal data. And the processor is an entity that processes on behalf and on the instructions of the controller. And finally, what's very relevant for this topic is that a transfer is the processing of personal data in a third country, either by the controller themselves or by the processor. These terminology, the definitions that we just looked at, they come out of the General Data Protection Regulation, which was a regulation that was passed in 2016, then came into force in 2018, and it deals with the processing of personal data. So one, it's for the protection of natural persons. That's the identified person that we just talked about in the definition. The processing of personal data itself, so what is done with that data. And then also there's a key focus on the movement of such data and the protections if the data is being moved. So just a brief overview of how we've arrived where we are. So in the Schrems II ruling last year, Court of Justice of the European Union decided that the EU-US Privacy Shield was no longer a valid transfer mechanism for transfers of personal data from the EU to the US. However, they affirmed the validity of the standard contractual clauses, subject to analyzing in which case they would be used and also implementing supplemental measures as appropriate. What the Schrems II ruling, however, didn't do was define what those supplementary measures might be. And for that, we turn to the EDPB recommendations, which are guidance to help determine in which scenarios supplementary measures might be appropriate, but then also to determine which supplementary measures might be appropriate. So as a roadmap, as a controller, using AWS, you have to know whether a transfer occurs, verify the transfer tool, such as the standard contractual clauses, assess the laws and practices in the recipient country, identify whether or not supplementary measures are appropriate, either provided by your provider, in this case AWS, and then formalize those steps. And also reevaluate steps 1 through 5 in appropriate intervals. And then on the AWS side, as a processor, we provide transparency to assist with the roadmap of the transfer assessment. We also provide measures, assurance, guidance, and customer controls that can be implemented in order to address the supplementary measures. Before I hand over to Hans to look at the data transfer assessment in more detail, I just wanted to highlight this quote by Steve Schmidt, is that AWS customers can continue to use AWS services in compliance with EU data protection law.
Thank you, Esther. And as Esther mentioned, the European Data Protection Board, the EDPB, adopted recommendations on measures to ensure compliance with cross-border data transfer. These recommendations provide data exporters, our customers, with a series of steps to do a data transfer assessment, a roadmap. From the first step of identifying the occurrence of transfer to the last step of establishing the governance over your transfer assessment. We will now go over each of these 6 steps. As the first step, customers should identify the occurrence of data transfer in their organization. Identifying all transfers of personal data to third countries can be a difficult exercise. But AWS provides the information to help identify the occurrence of data transfer. As a starting point, our European customers contract with the European Amazon Web Services entity in Luxembourg, and per customer agreement, the governing laws are then the laws of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. The AWS infrastructure has the concept of a region. A region is a location where we cluster our data centers. Each region consists of multiple, isolated and physically separate availability zones within a geographic area. Today we have 5 regions in the European Union, in Germany, France, Ireland, Italy and Sweden. Our infrastructure in Europe is growing, and we, for example, already announced a new region in Spain. Our customers can thus select an AWS region in the European Union to store their customer data. AWS will then not transfer customer data outside the customer's selected region in the EU, unless it's necessary to provide the service initiated by the customer, or as necessary to comply with law or a valid and binding order of a governmental body, which we will talk about later. The web page Privacy Features of AWS Services lists the small number of AWS services that involve transfer of customer data to develop and improve these services, but customers can opt out of that transfer. The web page also lists the services where transfer is an essential part of that service, such as, for example, a content delivery service. A customer can also review the web page AWS subprocessors to determine which subprocessors are applicable based on their selection of AWS regions and the services used. After identifying whether transfer occurs, the second step is to determine the so-called GDPR transfer tool. The European Commission may already declare the country, region or sector to which you are transferring the data provides an adequate data protection regime. This is then called an adequacy decision. If there is no adequacy decision applicable, you can rely on one of the transfer tools listed in GDPR under Article 46. In that context, AWS provides the standard contractual clauses, the SCCs, to validate transfers. As Esther mentioned, both the EU Court of Justice and the EDPB recommendations confirm that SCCs are still a valid GDPR transfer tool. As a third step, if data transfer is identified, our customers need to assess the laws of the third country where their data is transferred to. Our customers are best placed to determine the laws that apply to their data because they determine how, where and why they process this data that they use with the AWS services. It's good to know that AWS provides the same high level of protection for your data in other countries as it does in the EU. And irrespective of the laws that apply and regardless of the country from which a law enforcement information request originates, AWS reviews every law enforcement request individually and independently. We challenge law enforcement requests for customer data from governmental bodies, whether inside or outside the EU, where the request conflicts with EU law, such as GDPR, is overbroad, or where we otherwise have any appropriate grounds to do so. It's also important to point out that customers can choose to encrypt their content. And AWS provides the tools to encrypt data at rest or in motion, and customers can choose from a number of supported third-party security solutions. Content that has been encrypted is rendered useless without the applicable decryption keys. Apart from the theoretical context of law enforcement requests, the EDPB recommendations allow you to consider the practical experience of AWS with relevant prior instances of requests for access received from public authorities outside of the EEA. On that, AWS publishes regular reports on the Amazon Law Enforcement Information Requests webpage about the types and volume of law enforcement requests that we receive. This report demonstrates that disclosures by AWS of customer data in response to government requests for information are very rare. In fact, for the period January to June 2021, we had 0 requests that resulted in the disclosure to the US government of enterprise content data located outside the United States. After the previous steps, you may determine you want to leverage supplementary measures on data protection. At AWS, the highest priority is securing customer data. AWS implements rigorous technical and organizational measures to protect the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of your data. Our core infrastructure is built to satisfy the security requirements for military, global banks, and other high-sensitivity organizations. We have a shared responsibility model with our customers. AWS manages and controls the components from the host operating system and virtualization layer down to the physical security of the facilities in which the services operate. and our customers are responsible for building secure applications. In their recommendations, the EDPB identified a non-exhaustive list of supplementary measures that AWS and our customers can adopt. Regarding the measures AWS implemented, we achieved a number of internationally recognized certifications and accreditations, demonstrating compliance with third-party data protection frameworks, such as ISO 27017 for cloud security, ISO 27718 for cloud privacy, and ISO 27701 on our privacy information management system. We provide a wide variety of best practices documents, encryption tools, and other guidance that our customers can leverage in delivering application-level security measures. In addition, AWS partners offer hundreds of tools and features to help customers meet their security objectives, ranging from network security, configuration management, access control, to data encryption. Now Esther will introduce you to Step 5.
Thank you, Hans. Step 5 talks about formalizing the supplementary measures that are in place. And on the AWS side, as Hans already said, our data processing addendum already includes the standard contractual clauses. That both helps you answer Step 2, which is the transfer mechanism, but also then going on from that, you can use the supplementary addendum to our DPA as a supplementary measure that AWS provides. In that supplementary addendum, we've provided for strengthened contractual commitments that go beyond what's required by Schrems 2 to protect customer data. Significantly, actually, that this supplementary addendum applies not just when data is transferred, but when customer data is processed on AWS to which GDPR is applicable, so not just in a transfer scenario. And you also, in terms of the formalization aspect of it, don't need to enter into that agreement that addendum because it automatically applies as part of the DPA and has been included in our service terms. You may need to formalize some of the other supplementary measures that Hans just spoke to in order to be able to provide those to data protection authorities on request. But in terms of the contractual commitments, we've hopefully made it easy for you by including those online so that they're available and for all to see.
Thank you, Esther. And as the last step in the assessment process by our customers, the EDPB recommends to establish a governance process that reviews the identification of transfers and the implemented supplementary measures at regular intervals. Now, we've talked you through the 6-step process for a data transfer assessment. We have a separate presentation on Step 4, supplementary measures, with some examples of such measures.
Finally, for this session, we just want to leave you with this quote from Steve Schmidt again, that we continue to look at our processes and our services as the legislative or regulatory landscape evolves to ensure that customers can continue to use AWS services and benefit from the use thereof. Thank you very much for watching this session. We hope that you found it informative and helpful. Please also check out additional resources on our data protection webpage.